So if you look at it from a perspective of building blocks for a design, then hardware security wise, there are lots of things that are currently available. Okay, so you've got secure boot, you've got key provisioning and key storage, there are physically includable functions, there are lots and lots and lots of things on devices, but you have to use them correctly and you have to put them on and you have to want to put them on, and they have a cost because these things don't come for free. And the more scaled you go in terms of how you put a device together and how you put hardware together to make it secure, then that adds complexity and adds cost, which is where it all starts becoming a bit more tricky. But hardware is but 1%, if you like, of the issue. As Anna's pointed out, the firmware has to run on it. I have to put that in correctly. If I don't know how the protocols work and I put insecurity and vulnerabilities in the protocol, I can have the most fantastic piece of hardware in the world that's got all the relevant pieces in whatsoever, but I've blown a hole in it elsewhere. So you have to look at this whole thing from not just hardware. It's a very, very, very important part of it because that's the bit that's going to be remote. It's the bit that you've got no control over. You've got no control of anybody looking in. You have to try and think of all those things. So there's lots of things around hardware that have to be done to make hardware secure, no matter how many bits that the developers and manufacturers like ourselves have put in those devices.
I know there's a lot of options available there for hardware and software, both of them. What I do really have a problem, I always use the same analogy with cars. 40 years ago, everyone was trying a different thing with the cars. Audi was trying a different thing, BMW was trying a different thing. There was no framework around security or safety around cars in this case. I think there should be something around IoT devices as well. There should be a framework, there should be a certification by which they needed to comply with that. So maybe me as a manufacturer, I'm doing something really, really bad, or maybe something really, really good, but the problem is some other manufacturers are not doing it. So I think there should be some kind of regulation, some kind of certification that will bring all of us to the same level. That's
interesting. That's coming. That's the critical bit. So there are frameworks. So IoTSF have done a framework that spawned itself into NIST and into the now just released EU Cyber, which is, if you've not read it, it's an interesting read of an evening, but it's very impactful and it's something you're going to have to think about because it's heading for law. Okay, so things are going to become legislated, things are going to become required, and those frameworks for how you design hardware, how you put software together, how your data passages, how you've got data in transit, all the things that require security will quite quickly have an impact on what we do and how we think as developers.
In Europe, there is also the Cybersecurity Act that is coming on in 2 years. The problem about the certificates, I think I'm absolutely pro certification, but the problem is about verification. So how you verify that actually they are complying with what they are these devices are certificating, right? So there is a problem of metrics, how to measure this, and who is doing that. It's like a standard organization, it's like third-party certificator. So there are all these discussions in place that are not clear yet. And the problem is that the legislation is coming. It's like in 2 years, that's nothing for manufacturers to be actually regulated. So this is a big, huge problem. I think it needs to be discussed more from government.
Yeah, and equally, you've got to then look at, do I need to put the same level of testing and certification against a consumer IoT device, which is doing something, let's call it something benign, just to be really, really benign as a temperature sensor in a house, okay? versus an industrial control system versus something
Healthcare,
military and aerospace.
sensor.
So what am I testing against? Is there a level floor? Each one has got different requirements. So does it become by marketplace? And all these things at the moment are not ironed out even in the legislation. Okay, they kind of left it kind of open, but it will change. Absolutely, there is a cost to it. I think if you read and it depends on market. So you could talk about the UK, or we talk about Europe, and we talk about the US, and we talk about all the jurisdictions. They all have their own regulations. They all overlap and intermingle to some extent. And so ultimately, my end product is going to be sold here. I have to meet this regulation, and that's the decision you're making. So if you're making, you're an SME making for a small but very international market, absolutely, the potential is would be very onerous. So you're going to try and do the one that does the most, and therefore, do I come backwards and how do I certify? It's still a very complex problem to deal with. EU are basically looking at, well, it becomes part of RED. So if you want certification for your product, guess what? It's got to be cyber secure as well.
Security, let's say by design, or B certificate for security, it can be an advantage. Like, think about a big player like Apple. They put privacy and security like a selling point.
It's possible to make a secure product and it not be onerously more expensive than it is to make a unsecure connected product. Okay, the leap is not a huge leap forward. There's a mental leap to take, and there's a mindset leap to take of, I'm going to design this with security in mind, and that's the way in which our manufacturing goes. And there's lots of things around it, but component-wise, it's not like a factor of 10x more expensive, for instance. It's not that bad, but there is a heartfelt leap to be taken in. Actually, I have to design it from day one with that in mind. Yeah, lots of things are happening in the realm of things changing on silicon. If you look around all the silicon vendors, not just ourselves, then newer techniques get put on board. There is ultimately a limitation to what you can do on silicon if you do the design badly in the first place at your level, and you don't handle keys correctly, and you don't look at it as an individual device, and you do something just crazy silly that opens up your whole infrastructure and your whole system because somebody's peeled back the hardware.
Another point for motivating manufacturers and adopting security will be like making the users aware of what's happening in the smart home, for example. So collaborating with the data protection authorities, do sensitive materials of what happened when you are profiled by these devices, for example. So this is also important. So it's like a cooperation between standard organization, universities, data protection authorities, and manufacturers.
People think now, well, it's just a small company, this is a sensor, doesn't do anything, it's never gonna get hacked into it. But you are.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard.
One thing that I really hate is when they say, I have a VPN, I'm safe. This is really something, I really hate this. Because basically we discussed like the threats come from internal to your smart home. So having a VPN really doesn't save you.
There's no magic silver bullet on this one. It's not a case of, if I put this down, it's all fixed. Okay, this is now it's a big, to use that word, it's a big holistic problem you've got to deal with, which is looking at the threat environment you're going to be into, what the product does, what's the appropriate level of threat for that part. The parts are now becoming relatively standardized in security as to what's available. That benign little sensor on the wall could be the one thing the guy needs to get into the network in the building you're in. So everything on the network becomes important. Every element of that security becomes important. How you section it out, how you isolate things within its infrastructure and within its setup, how I isolate keys. Crucially is things like, the biggest one be ensuring that you don't do something that allows you to have an at-scale vulnerability.